Hello and welcome, my dear listeners, to her Revenge Arc, the place where we explore the quiet, simmering stories of justice served, not with a bang, but with the deliberate, satisfying precision of a well-laid plan. I am your storyteller. Find a comfortable place, perhaps pour yourself a cup of tea, and let the story unfold. For today's story is about the subtle poison of daily criticism, the theft of joy, and how a woman reclaimed her passion in the most public and most delicious way imaginable. It began, as so many subtle tragedies do, in the kitchen. My kitchen. It was a space I had once loved. A room filled with the ghosts of my grandmother's laughter and the phantom scents of her baking. The heavy wooden butcher block was worn smooth in the center from decades of use, first by her hands, then by my mother's, and finally by mine. It was my inheritance, not of money or property, but of something far more elemental. The knowledge of how to turn flour, water, and heat into comfort, into love. My husband, Mark, never understood this. To him, food was not about love or memory. It was about performance. It was a status symbol, a topic for intellectual dissection, a way to demonstrate his superior palate. He didn't just eat, he critiqued. He didn't just taste, he deconstructed. And I, his wife, was his perpetual in-house amateur, forever falling short of the mark. "It's a bit rustic, isn't it, Clara?" he would say, prodding a piece of roasted chicken with his fork. The chicken would be perfectly golden, the skin crisp, the meat juicy, the air fragrant with rosemary and thyme. I would have spent the better part of an hour tending to it, ensuring it was just right. But rustic was his word for unsophisticated. It was his gentle, dismissive way of telling me I had failed. Another time I made a beef bourguignon, a dish my grandmother had taught me. It was a labor of love, a 2-day process of marinating the beef in a good burgundy, slowly rendering bacon, browning the meat in batches, and simmering it for hours with pearl onions and mushrooms until it was so tender it yielded to the mere suggestion of a fork. The aroma filled the entire house, a deep, complex perfume of wine and herbs and rich, savory meat. Mark took a bite. He chewed slowly, his brow furrowed in concentration, as if he were a bomb disposal expert assessing a delicate device. He swallowed. Then he sighed. It was a long theatrical sigh, heavy with disappointment. "You know," he began, setting his fork down with a soft click. "The problem here is the Maillard reaction. You didn't get a hard enough sear on the beef before the braise. That's why the flavor profile feels a little flat, muddled." He picked up his wine glass. "Antoine Dubois says the sear is the soul of the stew. Without it, you just have boiled meat." Antoine Dubois. The name was a constant presence in our home, an invisible third person in our marriage. He was Mark's idol, a celebrity chef with a chiseled jaw, a charming French accent, and a television show called The Golden Ladle. Mark had all his cookbooks, their spines unbroken, displayed like religious texts on a shelf in the living room. He watched every episode of his show, offering a running commentary on Dubois's flawless technique, his impeccable knife skills, his genius flavor pairings. And every dish I made was held up to the impossible televised standard of Antoine Dubois. My pasta was never as al dente as Dubois would insist. My sauces lacked the velvety mouthfeel Dubois could apparently achieve with his eyes closed. My presentation was homey, which was Mark's code for sloppy. Each comment was a small sharp stone dropped into my heart. First I tried to fight back. "I thought it tasted nice, Mark. It's just dinner, not a Michelin star audition. My grandmother made it this way for 50 years. But he would just smile that patient, condescending smile. "Of course, darling. I'm just trying to help you elevate your craft. There's always room for improvement." His help felt like sandpaper on my soul. He wasn't trying to elevate me. He was trying to sand me down, to reshape me into a lesser version of his idol. The joy I once found in the rhythmic chop of vegetables, the alchemical magic of coaxing flavor from simple ingredients, began to curdle into anxiety. My kitchen, my sanctuary, started to feel like a courtroom where I was perpetually on trial, and always found wanting. I started cooking simpler things. Pastas with Jared sauces, pre-marinated meats from the butcher, Things he couldn't critique with the same vocabulary. If I didn't try, I couldn't fail. But the silence that replaced the criticism was somehow louder. He would eat his meal with an air of profound resignation, a martyr suffering through a plate of mediocrity. The unspoken message was clear. I had given up. I had let him down. The slow erosion of my confidence was profound. It bled out from the kitchen and into other areas of our life. I found myself second-guessing my opinions on films, on books, on the news. His expertise, so unassailable in the realm of cuisine, seemed to grant him authority over everything. I became quieter, more agreeable, my own thoughts and feelings seeming rustic and unelevated compared to his. I was a supporting character in the story of my own life. The turning point wasn't a single dramatic explosion. It was a quiet, cold evening in late autumn. I had found a beautiful cut of sea bass at the market and, for the first time in months, felt a flicker of the old inspiration. I decided to pan-sear it, to create that perfect crispy skin he was always talking about. I would serve it with the lemon butter sauce and delicate asparagus. I took my time. I dried the fish skin meticulously. I heated the pan until it was shimmering. I laid the fillet skin down and listened to that satisfying, aggressive sizzle. I didn't press down too hard. I let the heat do the work. I plated it beautifully. The fish sat atop the bright green asparagus, drizzled with the pale yellow, glistening sauce. It looked, I thought, like something you might see in a magazine. Mark came to the table, distracted by his phone. He took a few bites without looking up. "This is nice," he said, his eyes still glued to the screen. A small, fragile bud of hope bloomed in my chest. "Nice." "Yeah," he said, finally placing his phone face down on the table. He took another, more considered bite. "The skin is good. Crispy. You're getting better at controlling the heat." There it was. Not a compliment, but an assessment. A grade. "You're getting better." He continued. "You know, I was just watching a clip from the Golden Ladle. They're holding open auditions for the new season. It's a tournament format this year. Amateurs against the pros. The grand prize is $100,000 and your own web series." He chuckled. "Can you imagine the kind of people who sign up for that? Utterly delusional. Thinking they can cook against someone like Antoine Dubois." He forked a piece of the fish into his mouth. "He did a masterclass on searing fish last week. His secret is clarifying the butter first and adding a whisper of grapeseed oil to raise the smoke point. It creates a more even, brittle crust. You should watch it. It might help you get to the next level." He said it so casually, so thoughtlessly. He had taken my small victory, my moment of pride, and held it up against the blinding light of his idol, revealing it to be nothing more than a child's clumsy effort. A whisper of grapeseed oil. That was the difference between my love and his perfection. I didn't say anything. I just watched him eat the meal I had made, the meal he had simultaneously praised and belittled. And in that moment, something inside me didn't break. Solidified. It hardened from a simmering, formless resentment into a cold, sharp, and perfectly clear resolve. He thought those people were delusional. He thought the gap between a home cook and a master was an unbridgeable chasm. He had spent years convincing me of the same thing. That night, after he was asleep, I went to my laptop. The house was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I typed the Golden Ladle auditions into the search bar. The website was bright and garish, with a picture of Antoine Dubois smiling his $1,000,000 smile, holding a ridiculously oversized golden whisk. "Do you have what it takes to challenge a culinary giant?" the headline blared. I looked at the application form. It asked for your name, your cooking experience, and a short essay on your culinary philosophy. Under cooking experience, I simply wrote, "Lifelong." For the essay, I thought about my grandmother. I thought about the worn wooden butcher block and the scent of baking bread. I thought about turning simple things into comfort and love. I wrote about how food is a story, and how every dish tells the tale of a person, a family, a culture. I wrote that my philosophy was about honesty and heart, not about ego and theatrics. I filled out the entire form, my fingers flying across the keyboard. When I got to the final submit button, I hesitated for only a second. Clicked it. A confirmation page appeared. Thank you for your application. We will be in touch if you are selected for a live audition. I closed the laptop. I felt no fear, no anxiety. Just a strange, profound calm. The kitchen was dark, but for the first time in a very long time, it felt like my own again. The game had begun. Mark just didn't know he was a player. My plan required secrecy, a level of subterfuge I had never before attempted in my life. I told Mark I had joined a new book club that met twice a week, and a pottery class on Saturday mornings. It was the perfect cover. It was wholesome, domestic, and utterly unthreatening. The kind of hobby he would approve of for a wife like me. The reality was far different. My pottery class was a rented 6-hour block in a small shared commercial kitchen on the industrial side of town. It was run by a quiet, elderly man named Mr. Chan, who asked no questions as long as the rent was paid on time and the space was left clean. The kitchen was a stark contrast to my own. It was all stainless steel and harsh fluorescent lights, a place of function over feeling. But it was my haven. It was a laboratory where I could experiment without judgment. My book club nights were spent at the library, not discussing fiction, but devouring culinary texts. I wasn't reading Antoine Dubois's glossy, personality-driven cookbooks. I was going deeper. I read Escoffier. I read McGee on food and cooking. I studied the science of flavor pairings, the chemistry of emulsions, the physics of heat transfer. I was giving names and principles to the instincts my grandmother had passed down to me. I was building an arsenal of knowledge, sharpening the tools I already possessed. In Mr. Chen's kitchen I practiced. I worked on my knife skills until the motion was a fluid, thoughtless extension of my arm, until my brunoise was a pile of perfect tiny cubes. I made mother sauces over and over again, bechamel, velouté, hollandaise, until I could feel the precise moment they thickened, just by the resistance against the whisk. I broke down whole chickens, filleted fish, learned the precise art of the French trim on a rack of lamb. I was not trying to become Antoine Dubois. I was trying to become the most potent, most technically skilled version of myself. I took my grandmother's recipes, the rustic dishes Mark had so casually dismissed, and I began to elevate them on my own terms. I clarified the butter for her brown butter sauce. I used a pressure cooker to infuse more flavor into the broth for her chicken soup in a fraction of the time. I learned to make a perfect sphere of ice cream to accompany her apple tart, not because it was fancy, but because the science of it fascinated me. My hands, once hesitant, became sure and swift. My palate, which Mark had tried to convince me was unrefined, became my most trusted guide. I was rediscovering a part of myself I thought I had lost forever. The joy came flooding back, purer and stronger this time, because it was mine alone. It was a secret garden I tended in the dark, away from the blight of his criticism. 2 weeks later an email arrived. I had been selected for a live audition in the city. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage. This was it. The abstract plan was now a concrete reality. The audition was on a Saturday, pottery class day. I told Mark I was going on a field trip with my class to a ceramics museum. He barely looked up from his newspaper. Have fun, darling. The audition was held in a massive television studio. It was organized chaos. Dozens of hopeful home cooks were crammed into a holding area, each with a cooler box containing the ingredients for their signature dish. The air was thick with nervous energy, a cacophony of clashing ambitions and anxieties. People were boasting about their skills, name-dropping famous chefs, psyching each other out. I found a quiet corner, took a deep breath, and focused on my own task. My signature dish was a modern take on my grandmother's mushroom gnocchi. The gnocchi themselves were featherlight, made with ricotta instead of just potato, a trick I'd perfected over weeks of practice. The sauce was a deeply savory wild mushroom ragu, enriched with a touch of cream and white truffle oil. For garnish I had paper-thin, crispy shards of prosciutto and a dusting of aged Parmesan. It was a dish that was both comforting and elegant. It was me on a plate. When my name was called, I walked to a stainless steel cooking station. 3 producers stood watching with clipboards and impassive faces. One of them was a junior version of Antoine Dubois, A stern-looking man with a French accent that sounded more practiced than natural. This was my first hurdle. "You have 1 hour," he announced to our group of 10. "Begin." For that hour the world fell away. The noise, the cameras, the other contestants, it all dissolved into a dull hum. There was only me, my ingredients, and the muscle memory I had honed in Mr. Chen's quiet kitchen. I worked cleanly and efficiently. I rolled the gnocchi with a light touch. I seared the mushrooms until they were deeply browned and fragrant. I mounted the sauce with cold butter at the last second to give it a perfect glossy sheen. With 10 minutes to spare, I plated my dish. I wiped the rim of the bowl clean. It looked exactly as I had pictured it. I had done my best. The rest was out of my hands. The French producer came to my station first. He picked up a fork, took a single gnocchi, and ate it. His face was a mask of neutrality. He made a note on his clipboard. He tasted the sauce. He made another note. He said nothing. He simply moved on to the next person. The wait was excruciating. After they had tasted everyone's dish, the three of them conferred in a quiet huddle. Names were called. Some people packed up their things with crestfallen faces. Others beamed with relief. My name had not been called. I felt a cold dread creep into my stomach. Had I been delusional after all? Then the French producer walked directly toward me. "Clara," he said, his voice flat. I braced myself for rejection. "Your technique is sound. The gnocchi were light. The seasoning was balanced." He paused. "You will be moving on to the first round of the televised competition. Do not be late. Do not be complacent. The chef does not tolerate complacency." He walked away before I could even process it. I had done it. I had gotten through. A slow, wide smile spread across my face. It was a genuine smile. A feeling I hadn't experienced in years. It was the smile of a woman who was finally cooking for herself. The first few rounds of the Golden Ladle were a blur of escalating pressure. The set was intimidating. A gleaming culinary arena with stadium-style seating for a live audience. And there, at the judges' table, sat Antoine Dubois himself, flanked by a stern food critic and a bubbly, popular food blogger. He was exactly as he was on television, impossibly handsome, impeccably dressed, and radiating an aura of absolute authority. Mark, of course, was ecstatic that the show was back on the air. He would sit glued to the television every Tuesday night, a glass of expensive wine in hand. "Look at that fool, Clara," he'd say, pointing at a contestant fumbling with the fish. "He's completely butchering that beautiful turbot. No respect for the ingredient." I would just nod, my heart pounding. I was on that very stage, just out of frame. The early rounds focused on large groups of contestants, and the cameras naturally gravitated towards the most dramatic personalities, or the most spectacular failures. I was neither. I was quiet, focused, and competent. I stayed in the middle of the pack, deliberately flying under the radar. I made a vibrant, perfectly balanced gazpacho in the Summer Soups Challenge. I produced a flawless, towering soufflé in technical bakes. I was surviving. I was advancing. My double life became a complex dance of logistics and lies. I would record the show and watch it in the dead of night, studying my performance, analyzing my competitors. My pottery classes and book club meetings became more frequent as the competition intensified. Mark never suspected a thing. He was too absorbed in the spectacle, too busy admiring his hero, to notice the quiet revolution happening under his own roof. The challenge that changed everything was in the quarterfinals. There were only 8 of us left. The theme was memory. We had to create a dish that told a personal story. While the other contestants talked about exotic travels or apprenticeships in famous restaurants, I knew exactly what I would make. I would make the dish Mark had eviscerated years ago, the beef bourguignon. This time, however, it would be my version, the perfected version. I had spent weeks in Mr. Chen's kitchen breaking down its components, applying the science I had learned to the art my grandmother had taught me. I got the hardest, most beautiful sear on the beef, deglazing the pan with cognac before adding the wine, building layers of flavor. I made my own beef stock from roasted bones, a process that took 2 full days. I didn't use standard pearl onions. I used sweet, tender cipollini onions that I glazed in butter and sugar until they were like tiny, savory jewels. I served it not as a rustic stew but deconstructed, the impossibly tender beef sitting on a pool of the silken, deeply flavorful sauce, surrounded by the glazed onions, sautéed mushrooms, and tiny crisp bacon lardons. On the side, a dollop of the creamiest potato puree, passed through a sieve 3 times for an ethereal texture. When I presented it to the judges, I told them the story. Not my story with Mark, but the story of my grandmother. I spoke of her hands worn with love, teaching me to cook in her warm, sunlit kitchen. I spoke of how this dish was the ultimate expression of her belief that time and care were the most important ingredients. Antoine Dubois listened intently, his piercing blue eyes fixed on me. He took a bite. The whole studio was silent. He closed his eyes for a moment, chewing slowly. A flicker of something I couldn't decipher crossed his face. When he spoke, his voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. In my career, he said, his French accent lending gravity to every word, I have eaten beef bourguignon in the finest restaurants in Paris. It is a dish I know intimately. It is a dish that is often ruined by arrogance, by a chef trying too hard. He looked directly at me. This is not that. This is a dish made with profound understanding. The technique is flawless, yes, the sear, the sauce, the puree, it is all perfect. But more than that, it has a soul. He took another bite. Your grandmother would be very proud. The bubbly food blogger was crying. The stern critic was nodding, a rare smile on his face. I was voted through to the semifinals. That night, Mark watched the episode. I sat on the other end of the sofa, my body rigid with tension. He watched my segment, listened to my story. He saw Antoine Dubois praise my dish, the very dish he had once called flat and muddled. His face was a canvas of conflicting emotions. Confusion first, then a dawning horrified recognition. He turned to look at me, his mouth slightly agape. The wine glass in his hand trembled. Clara, he whispered, as if seeing me for the first time. That was you. I just looked at him, my expression calm. Yes, Mark. But your pottery class, the book club. There is no pottery class, I said, my voice even. There is no book club. He was speechless. He stared from the television, where my face was now being shown in a triumphant montage, back to me, the quiet, unassuming woman on his sofa. The two images wouldn't connect in his mind. The cognitive dissonance was a palpable force in the room. You're in the semifinals, he stammered. Against? You're cooking against professionals. Yes, I said. He didn't know what to say. He couldn't berate me. His own idol had just called my cooking soulful and perfect. He couldn't claim credit. I had done this all in secret, funded by my own small savings and hidden in a world he knew nothing about. All he could do was stare, his carefully constructed world of expertise and superiority crumbling around him. The foundation of our marriage, his role as the teacher and mine as the perpetual student, had been dynamited on national television. He didn't sleep that night. I could hear him pacing in the living room, the low murmur of the television playing and replaying the scene. He was recontextualizing our entire life together through this new shocking lens. Every rustic meal, every sigh of disappointment, every condescending piece of advice, it all had to look very different to him now. The next morning, he tried to act as if everything had changed for the better. He was effusive, overly enthusiastic. I can't believe it, Clara. This is incredible. We're a team. I can help you prepare. I've studied Dubois for years, I know his weaknesses. We can strategize. He tried to touch my arm to pull me into this new narrative he was hastily writing, one where he was the coach, the manager, the strategist behind the star. I pulled my arm away, gently but firmly. No, Mark, I said, my voice still quiet, still calm. There is no we. There is no team. You don't get to be a part of this. You spent years telling me I wasn't good enough. The only reason I am here is because I finally stopped listening to you. The truth of it hung in the air between us, stark and undeniable. His face fell. For the first time, I saw not a critic or a connoisseur. but a small, insecure man, stripped of his only source of power. He had built his sense of self on the scaffold of my inadequacy, and I had just kicked it out from under him. The semifinals were a duo challenge. We were paired with one of the pro chefs from the show's roster, and by a twist of fate that felt like cosmic poetry, I was paired with Antoine Dubois himself. We had to create a 3-course menu together in 3 hours. The studio was buzzing. The narrative was too perfect. The dark horse amateur and the reigning king, forced to collaborate. Mark was in the audience. A special ticket provided by the studio for the families of the Final Four. I could feel his eyes on me, a burning, desperate gaze. Dubois and I stood at our station. He looked at me, not with arrogance but with a professional curiosity. "So," he said, his voice low, "the home cook with the soul. What shall we create?" For a moment the old fear flickered. I was standing next to the man whose shadow had loomed over my life for years. But then I looked at my own hands, steady and capable. I thought of my grandmother. I thought of the quiet hours in Mr. Chen's kitchen. "I think," I said, meeting his gaze, "we should create something that is both elegant and honest. Your technique, my soul." A small smile played on his lips. "I like that. Let us begin." What followed was not a battle of wills, but the most exhilarating collaboration of my life. We moved around each other with an unspoken understanding, a shared language of food. I suggested a delicate scallop crudo with the citrus vinaigrette for the appetizer. He refined it, suggesting we use blood orange and add a hint of fennel for complexity. He proposed a duck breast for the main. I suggested a cherry and port wine reduction sauce, a recipe I had perfected, and a side of creamy polenta. For dessert, we agreed on a lavender-infused crème brûlée, a nod to both his French heritage and my love of floral notes. It was a dance. He would execute a perfect razor-thin slice, and I would arrange it on the plate with an artist's eye. I would create a sauce with a deep, resonant flavor, and he would taste it and suggest a single drop of sherry vinegar to brighten the finish. We weren't a pro and an amateur. We were just two people who loved food, working together to create something beautiful. We finished with seconds to spare. The 3 dishes stood on the pass, looking magnificent. We had done it. Mark watched from the audience, his face pale. He was watching me work as an equal with his god. We won the challenge unanimously. We were through to the finale. My competitor in the final cook-off would be the only other person to advance, Antoine Dubois. The final showdown of The Golden Ladle was built for television. The stage was grander, the lights brighter, the audience larger. The challenge was simple, yet profound. Create a single dish that defines you as a cook. My opponent was the man whose ghost had haunted my kitchen for a decade. And my chief spectator was the man who had invited that ghost in. Mark sat in the front row, looking drawn and small in the vast, cheering crowd. As the host announced the challenge, a sense of perfect, crystalline calm settled over me. I knew exactly what I was going to make. It wasn't my grandmother's gnocchi. It wasn't the bourguignon. It was the dish that had marked the beginning of my true journey. The dish that had been the catalyst for this entire rebellion. I was going to make pan-seared sea bass with a lemon butter sauce and asparagus. It was an audacious choice. It was simple, almost deceptively so. On a stage built for spectacle, I was choosing subtlety. I was choosing to prove that perfection did not lie in complexity, but in execution. The clock started. 2 hours. I saw Dubois begin to bustle, pulling out equipment for a sous vide, liquid nitrogen, a smoker. He was creating theater. I turned to my own station and began to work with a quiet, deliberate focus. I started by clarifying my butter, just as he had once suggested in that clip Mark had shown me. I let the milk solid separate and sink, skimming the pure, golden fat from the top. I added a single drop of grapeseed oil to my pan. I was using his own advice, not to copy him, but to show that I had learned the rules so well that I could now make them my own. I trimmed the asparagus with precision. I blanched it for exactly 90 seconds in heavily salted water, before plunging it into an ice bath to lock in its vibrant green color and crisp texture. I turned to the fish. I had chosen a beautiful thick fillet of Black Sea bass. I scored the skin with a sharp knife. I patted it dry again and again until the skin was like parchment. This was the secret. Not just the heat of the pan but the absence of moisture. With 30 minutes left, I began the final cook.
I heated pan.
I added the clarified butter and oil. I laid the fish skin down into the shimmering fat. The sizzle was clean sharp. I did not touch it. I let the pan do its work. I watched as the flesh turned from translucent to opaque, the heat creeping slowly up the side of the fillet. While the fish cooked, I made my sauce. In a separate pan, I reduced white wine and lemon juice with finely minced shallots. Then, off the heat, I began to whisk in cold cubes of butter. One by one, creating a stable, creamy emulsion. The sauce thickened to a perfect, velvety consistency. It was a simple sauce but a technically demanding one. 1 degree too hot and it would break. I flipped the fish for a mere 10 seconds, just to kiss the flesh with heat. I removed it from the pan and let it rest. The skin was the uniform golden brown. It was as crisp and delicate as a potato chip. In the last 2 minutes I plated. A swipe of the bright yellow sauce. A neat arrangement of the brilliant green asparagus. And finally the fish placed gently on top, skin side up. I sprinkled it with a touch of flaky sea salt and a scattering of fresh chives. It was minimalist. It was confident. It was perfect. Du Bois presented his dish first. It was a masterpiece of modern cuisine. A sous vide lobster tail resting on a squid ink risotto with a passion fruit foam and edible flowers. It was visually stunning, a work of art. The audience gasped. Then it was my turn. I carried my simple plate to the judges' table. It looked almost naked next to the memory of Du Bois's creation. The judges tasted his dish. They praised its ingenuity, its boldness, its technical brilliance. Then they turned to mine. The stern critic went first. He took a bite of the fish. The crackle of the skin was audible on his microphone. He ate it with a piece of asparagus and a bit of the sauce. He closed his eyes. "Extraordinary," he said simply. The bubbly blogger tasted it next. I don't know what to say. Every single element is perfect. The fish is cooked perfectly. The skin is a miracle. The sauce is so bright and alive. It's the most delicious plate of food I have eaten in the entire competition. Finally, it was Antoine's turn to taste his own competitor's dish. He was a judge as well as a finalist. He picked up his fork. He cut into the fish. He ate. He looked up, not at the other judges but at me. There was no artifice in his eyes, no television persona. There was only respect. "In cooking," he said, his voice resonating through the silent studio, "there is technique and there is heart. It is a rare thing to find a dish where the two are in such perfect, inseparable harmony. The goal of a great chef is not to show off. It is to take a beautiful ingredient and allow it to be the best possible version of itself. Tonight, Clara has done that. This dish is flawless." The voting was a formality. The host opened the envelope. He announced my name. Confetti rained down from the ceiling. The audience erupted. I just stood there watching the glittering paper fall, feeling a profound sense of peace. I had done it. I had not just won. I had proven a point to Mark and, more importantly, to myself. My rustic cooking, my soulful approach, when honed with discipline and knowledge, was not just good enough. It was the best. I looked into the audience and my eyes found Mark's. He was standing but not clapping. He looked utterly lost. A man adrift in a sea of celebration for a victory he could neither comprehend nor be a part of. The chasm between us was no longer just about cooking. It was about respect, about value, about seeing another person for who they truly are. And he had failed on every count. Later that evening, I came back to a dark, quiet house. My trophy, a heavy golden ladle, was in my bag. Mark was sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where he had delivered 1,000 tiny cuts to my spirit. "Clara," he began, his voice raspy, "I am so proud of us." The word was a final, desperate attempt to reclaim the narrative. I placed the golden ladle on the table between us. It gleamed under the dim light. There is no us, Mark, I said, my voice gentle but unbreakable. There's just you. And there's me. And I think for the first time you finally see me. The problem is, I've been seeing you clearly for a very long time. I didn't need to say more. I didn't need to shout or cry. The revenge wasn't in the winning, not really. It was in the knowing. The complete, unshakable knowledge of my own worth. I had taken back my kitchen. I had taken back my joy. And now I was taking back my life. The next morning I packed a bag, leaving the trophy on the table. It was a beautiful object, but I didn't need it anymore. My victory was something I carried inside me now. And so, my dear listeners, that is Clara's story. A tale of how the quietest rooms can host the most profound revolutions. It makes one wonder about the passions we hold dear, and the voices we allow to diminish them. I leave you with this question to ponder. Have you ever had to reclaim a passion that someone else tried to take from you? What did it take to hear your own voice again above the noise of criticism? Share your stories in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like, sharing it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribing to her Revenge Arc for more tales of justice, meticulously served. Until next time, be well, and listen to the stories your own heart is trying to tell you.